Hi, everybody. This is Saad for the Saad Truth. I've had all sorts of illustrious guests over the past almost 9 years now on this show, but I have never had a brigadier general. So I am giddy as a kid. How you doing, General?
Great to see you, Gad.
You too,
Thanks for
Anthony.
having me on.
Oh, I'm very excited. Okay, let's go through the bio very quickly. You were a brigadier general of the U.S. military. You're now retired. You performed the duties of Undersecretary for Defense for Policy. You commanded combat units in the 82nd, 101st Airborne, and the 10th Mountain Divisions. You earned Combat Action Badge and the Bronze Star Medal. You were Secretary of Transportation at the state level for North Carolina, author of 15 books of fiction, including several bestsellers, and your most recent one, which we'll be talking about shortly, Total Empire. It just came out. Did I cover some of the highlights, or do you want to add anything to your bio?
No, that's great. I served in the military. I served in education. I served in transportation and state government, and then I got to serve at DoD at the highest level. It's my career, my life has been one of public service.
That's wonderful. Actually, my son, I mean, I have both a son and a daughter, and as you might imagine, young boys, not to be stereotypical, love military stuff. So just like me, when I told him that I'm speaking to a brigadier general, he was all excited. There is something, I mean, I know that brigadier general is one-star general, but just the name brigadier has this aura about it. You want to weigh in on that, or
Yeah,
there's
sure. It's an old school rank. Brigadier is associated with command of a large brigade combat team, and it has a lot of lore around it. And there's major general, lieutenant general, and general. But brigadier does have that sort of
exactly.
eloquence to it that brings back, harkens to some of the lore of former conflicts throughout the ages.
There you go. Okay, so let's begin. We'll talk, as I think I mentioned offline. We'll begin by talking about your latest book. I'm also excited in a sense to have a fiction author on this show because
Mm-hmm.
most if not all of the people that I've hosted who've written books typically operate in the nonfiction world. So I have a good sense, having written many books myself, of what is the mechanism by which you organize your thinking when you're writing a nonfiction
Sure.
book. So I guess my first question will be, tell us about the premise of this book, and then how do you go about creating the work? Take it away.
Yeah. So again, Total Empire is all about our protagonist. It's a recurring series, General Garrett Sinclair, who commands Joint Special Operations Command, and his goddaughter goes missing in this obscure terrain feature called the Eye of Africa in Mauritania after some combat there, and her father is killed at that location. And Sinclair has to go find her. And in his pursuit of his goddaughter, he uncovers a Chinese plot to have a laser targeting system to guide hypersonic glide vehicles from outer space to they're laden with nuclear weapons to specific locations in the United States. And the crazy thing is, I get my plot ideas from just reading. I do a lot of commentating on Fox News and Newsmax. Used to do a lot of CNN. They don't allow that back and forth now because it's trench warfare and the information dominance game here. But as I'm preparing for and just being a student of foreign policy, international relations, I see, China tested some hypersonic glide vehicles a few years ago. And as you know, being an author, it takes about, for me, 6 to 9 months to write a book. And then it's about a year in production with the publisher, Macmillan St. Martin's Press. So that's almost 2 years that things. So you've got to be predictive. And some people who read my book say, "Oh, that's a little far out. That would never happen." And 2 years later, it's like happening. And I was on another show with Laura Ingraham, and she's like, "Total Empire. It's about China trying, and we were talking about China, Putin, Xi Putin talking a few weeks ago, and she said this is what they want is total empire. So that's why I named the book that. It's a piece of fiction, but all of the underpinnings of it are the real world stage and the machinations of China going for global hegemony and using its levers of national power to do so, whether through information, through military, through economic means. And so I blend the fiction with a backstop by very real motivations and a set that people don't have to spend too much disbelief as they're reading my stories.
Got you. And now, how much do you think of your creative process as you write? I think, is it 15 books now? Is that the right number?
15. Yeah, I turned in number 16, the sequel to Total Empire. I turned in last month to my editor at St. Martin's Press.
Oh, congrats.
So, thanks.
They're all within the military thriller genre. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much. It's kind of like being typecast. I'd love to read mystery, crime thrillers, and all that, and I'd love to write that. And my Jake Mahegan series had trended toward that direction. But given my background, the editors with whom I've worked really want me to focus on this particular niche of the genre because there's a solid market for it, and we feed into that market. And so I blend in a little crime, a little mystery, and a little military thriller together so that I'm writing what I like to read, which is when I have people talking to me, Gad, about, I'm an aspiring writer, what's your advice? So I'm like, write not what you know, but what you like to read, because that's where your real passion is. That's a good mirror image of where your interests lie. And so for me, that's been useful. And as I use a screenplay guide to sort of frame my books. It's a book called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, and always the opening scene, the hero has to do something good, right? So you like the hero save the cat, and then there's very specific plot points that they say you should hit. I don't use it religiously, but I do the big muscle movements, act 1, act 2, act 3. There's some kind of culmination in each of the acts, and it leads into a bigger crescendo finale occurring. And I love the creative process. I get a lot of good commercial trade publication reviews that talk about the creativity and innovation of the plots. It's not just the standard deal where you've got somebody's in trouble and the hero comes and saves the day and gets the girl at the end. All those components are there, but it's my plots. I think I put a lot of thought into them and the richness of these geopolitics playing out on the world stage.
How much do you, I can almost answer the question for you, but do you think that you would have been as able to, generate all of these fictional stories in your various books, were it not that you were a military man, or would it have been impossible for you to create what you've done so far as an author, void of that experience?
Well, certainly, my life experience informs my writing. So absolutely, my agent, Scott Miller at Trident Media Agency, when I shifted from Kinzinane books in my Jake Mahegan series to the Garrett Sinclair series at St. Martin's, he said, let's give Scott something new. Give me a general. He was trying to tap into my experience. Give me a fictional general, special ops guy, that kind of thing. So my agent, who's been very good, helped shape this series that's happening right now, and readers like it. So hypothetically, if I had not served in the military, the burning desire to write would still be there, and perhaps I would have trended in a different direction. But even as a kid, I visited old Civil War battlefields, Revolutionary War battlefields, and all of that really interested me, which kind of drove my decision to go to West Point and serve in the military. My parents were both school teachers, and they were big on patriotism and public service, and so the sense of giving back and serving. At the end of the day, books are about characters, and Garrett Sinclair is about service to his country, to his men and women that he's privileged to lead. And so all of that was sort of resident in me even as a kid. And so if it wasn't a military, maybe it would be a cop, or maybe it would be, trend toward the crime mystery stuff that I truly enjoy reading.
I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where, given my public engagement, I receive, innumerable emails from people from around the world, from all walks of life. And I'm always proud to say that the ones that, provide me perhaps the greatest amount of, pleasure when I receive them are from military folks. So I receive, here's this green beret guy, here's this special forces guy, because they're wed to reality, right? So I mean, this doesn't mean that I don't appreciate receiving a lovely letter from a fellow academic from Stanford or Harvard. That's also great. That's wonderful. You're always happy to receive good words from anybody. But there is something unique about receiving those and it's funny because I was going to ask you this later, but I'll do it now as a segue. There is a brotherhood. Obviously, this. I mean, I used to be a competitive soccer player, so there is this kind of, you go to war when you get into the field, and you go through these, and so there is this unique bond that is created with a man's man, right? And yet I try to imagine myself if I could have been a military guy, and I wonder if maybe I would have been unsuccessful, because one of the reasons that I have the public platform that I have is that I'm incredibly irreverent to orthodoxy, to group mindset. And in the military, for better or worse, there is a hierarchy. You can't always be a free thinker. So would there be room for someone with my personality profile had I been in the military, or would I have always had to hold my tongue because there is some superior general such as yourself who's saying, shut your mouth, Saad, don't say what you're about to say?
I can get a Canadian recruiter over to your house with a set of shears to shave your head and give you a PT test to test your physical fitness. But and speaking of which, I had when I was a deputy commanding general in Afghanistan, I had a Canadian brigade in my brigade combat team. David Fraser was the brigadier in charge of that, and they performed wonderfully, and it was a great team with Canada, and there were some UK troops working in there too. But your point, I feel like I'm that guy that you're describing, right? Because I am not conventional. It was not conventional for me to be thinking about, in this very right brain kind of way, writing and not accepting the orthodoxy that was imposed upon me, while also understanding you have to operate within a chain of command. You have a very regimented schedule. And so finding that balance, and I think this might be one of the reasons why I enjoy writing. I've got the left brain saying, okay, you got to do X amount a day. You got to be organized about it. You got to be detailed about it. You got to do the research. And I got the right brain saying, hey, what about this? What about this? What about this? And so that balance, I actually did a TED talk on this, the art and science of writing. And I think within the context of serving in the military, I also saw that, and I understood that I had to, and the right brain of me said, okay, let's go here to attack this area, because I think, my instincts are that this will put pressure on the enemy in this way. And then my left brain saying, okay, but you need the the beans, the bullets, the fuel, etc. And being able to understand the high concept and also the logistics to achieve the high concept is pretty rare, I would say, to be able to balance those two things. And maybe that's why I was successful in some respects. I also had great teams around me, helping me achieve the goals that the unit had to achieve and so forth. Nobody in the military gets anything done by themselves. So, but to the extent that I was successful, I think it was because I was much like what you're characterizing, this creative side, not accepting, the talking points, challenging that in my own way while still being respectful, still understanding that I'm subordinate in the chain of command and have a boss to answer to. Even as the Undersecretary of Defense, I was the number 3 guy in the Pentagon. I still had to answer to the Deputy Secretary, the Secretary, and the President. Right. So you've always got a boss, and understanding
my
that
boss is called my wife.
Yeah, right. So,
yeah, no, that's great.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to, so in preparing for our chat today, I went and I called through all of my writings where, there was some finding from the scientific literature that was, military related. And so I put together a bunch of these, which I thought would be really cool to discuss with the Brigadier General. So the first one is not that it matters to you, the reference, but maybe somebody wants to look it up. The paper is titled Facial Dominance of West Point Cadets as a Predictor of Later Military Rank. And the idea being that there are certain morphological signatures, for example, when you have a facial features that are honest markers of testosterone, does that then correlate to subsequent ability to ascend the hierarchy? Right? I mean, you right, when you think of a leading man in Hollywood, you expect them to be tall, good looking, and so on. So Humphrey Bogart doesn't meet that standard yet. He was right. And so this study, it's actually by two people, one of whom I know. His name is Alan Mazur. He's a sociologist at Syracuse University. I think he's still alive. He was quite a bit older than me. What they found in this paper is that, yes, if you could look at the photos of cadets early in their career, and those are predictive of, later success in the military. So having said that, anecdotally, do you feel as though that in your career, when you look at someone, you say, this guy or gal, but usually guy, has the stuff to be, because he looks the part? Did you ever succumb to that cognitive bias?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's probably something to that. There can be people that look the part and judging the book by its cover, but at the end of the day, they have to stand up in front of troops. They have to deliver orders, or I'm thinking back to when I would stand up in front of my paratrooper battalion before a jump and say, men, we're going to do this. I'll be the first one out the door. I lead from the front. Here's the mission. And so there's a certain, you can look the part, but you also got to have the substance of the leader. I don't know. I think we get that positive reinforcement if somebody looks the part. I have no idea if I look the part, but if somebody looks the part, I think you get a buy, or you get a pass, or until you can't fill the part, maybe. Right. So that's what I would say, is that there's probably some of that. And then when you can't live up to the billing, then perhaps you're put on the average path or whatever.
Right. I want to, by the way, show you. I don't know if you could see it. Do you see this image?
Mm-hmm.
This is actually a fan who sent it to me, and it's doctored with and I didn't put up this poster for in honor of your visit. It's been there, so that's an appreciation of how much I love the military. Second set of findings. You ready?
Sure.
So this is actually these set of references come from this book, The Parasitic Mind, which was my last book. The book is about which, and we'll get into this wokeness in the military in a second. The book is about, where did these parasitic, what I call idea pathogens, originate? And of course, they regrettably, as a professor, I'm saying this, regrettably, they all originate from the university ecosystem, precisely because it takes intellectuals to come up with some of the dumbest ideas possible. And so I first trace the root of these parasitic ideas that have now infested every nook and cranny of society. And then I offer an inoculation, a mind vaccine against some of these ideas. And in one of the chapters where I'm talking about the male feminist, the archetype of the guy who really cares, the guy who wears the scarf, who hugs the trees and so on, I actually argue that person has a morphological signature. He doesn't typically look like the Navy SEAL. And in support of that position that I was taking, I then cite a bunch of very serious scientific papers. I won't go through all of them, but what the papers show, and again, I'm going to link it to the military, is that if you take, for example, people's positions on social egalitarianism, should we all be equal? Should we redistribute wealth from the powerful to the needy? Should we engage in military interventionism in places far away from our shores? And it turns out, this may or may not surprise you, Anthony, it turns out that physical strength or physical formidability of the person answering the question is predictive of how they respond to those economic and political issues. The more physically formidable I am, for example, even as measured by something as hand grip strength, that turns out to be a predictor of the likelihood of my supporting, for example, military interventionism. More powerful I am, the more I am for military interventionism. More powerful I am physically, the less likely I am for let's all hug and get along. Any thoughts on that? Because it very much relates.
So that's really interesting. That's the brawn over brain argument. What I would tell you is that I think it relates to the earlier discussion about how you look and all of that, because I played baseball. I wrestled at West Point and in high school, and I considered joining the military my version of being a professional athlete, and so I've always been relatively physically fit and fairly aggressive. And there was probably a time where I trended in that direction, and so I would say, yeah, probably right. At the same time, once you get into combat and you have the experience of losing soldiers in combat, you understand firsthand that this is not child's play, that we should not be sent to war for anything other than a vital national security interest, and that the deployment of an army somewhere should be taken very seriously and only for the right reasons. And I think that's one of the reasons that our government works as the civilian control of the military, because you have these very physically fit, brawn, leaders that fit the stereotype, that are promoted, and they're gung ho for the most part, and then you've got people that maybe aren't that in this, with the civilian control of military, that buffers this aggression tendency, saying, okay, let's go fight here. And you had Rumsfeld, who was a wrestler in college,
Right.
and fit and all of that. He wanted to go to war with everybody, right? So I think there's something to be said about that. If every problem, if all you got is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail.
Right.
And if you're a combative kind of guy, and you think you can handle it by crushing the other person, then that may inform your thinking.
But I thought, even outside the context of the military, I think there's something quite insightful about the fact that many of the internal ideological positions that we take are actually predicted by what you would think should be irrelevant, which is your morphology. And actually, I'm trying to use some of those principles. So what in my academic career, in my scientific career, I try to marry evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology to consumer behavior. And so in a set of studies that I'm thinking, of doing now with some graduate students, is looking at what I call morphological consumption. The idea is that which car that I choose, which product that I prefer, might in part be determined by my morphology. And again, what makes these kinds of studies interesting is because you wouldn't have thought of linking a morphological trait to a consumer choice, or a morphological trait to a socioeconomic position that you take. And yet our physiques do predict.
That's really interesting. I have to connect you with my West Point roommate, Ed Fox, who is now the chair of the marketing department at SMU.
Oh, wow.
Business school. He got his PhD from Wharton. He's the only reason I graduated, because he studied by teaching me. I was busy playing baseball and wrestling, and Ed was like the smartest guy in the school, and I just lucked out to get him as my roommate 4 years in a row, and we became dear friends. He flew up to Fort Drum from Dallas for my promotion to Brigadier, and in the middle of in January, when you can't travel anywhere up there. So yeah, so
that's
but
cool.
That's really interesting, and he does a lot of this kind of thing, looking at research on obviously he runs the marketing department there.
Right. No,
So
I'd love to connect. Okay,
yeah.
remember I said I'm going to discuss several scientific studies that relate to military. This one comes from this book, which is my forthcoming book on, happiness and the good life. People would often write to me and say, notwithstanding all of the serious things that you tackle, you always seem to have a smile on your face. You're always playful. What's your secret, Professor Saad? And I said, well, you know what? Let me write a book about it. And so in the process of writing that book, I came across this study, which I cite in the book. It's titled, Happy Soldiers Are Highest Performers. It was published in the Journal of Happiness Studies, where they looked at this gigantic data set from the military, in a real data set. And they found that the soldiers that received, bravery awards and so on average scored higher on various happiness metrics. And so the main takeaway from the study is, the happier I am, the better I perform. In this case, it's in the military, but of course you could extend it to other contexts. Happy employees make good employees. Have you ever in your career in the military studied things like the well-being, the contentment, the happiness scores of your soldiers?
Yeah, not in a data-driven scientific way as you're describing, but leadership is all about monitoring the welfare of your men and women. And so I would do things like walk through the barracks, talking to individual soldiers. You're constantly testing the temperature of your troops, getting to know them, and being present to them so they can get to know you as their leader. And so there's a lot there, as you're talking about. There is a definite connection between security, happiness, and performance. And if we're in Afghanistan or Iraq, or pick the country where there was conflict, if the soldier knows that his or her family or affairs are squared away, they can then focus better on the mission. And if they have good teamwork within their squad, platoon, whatever, that's reinforcing. And if they're accepted, and if they're getting that positive feedback every day with awards and that kind of thing, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm happy, I'm doing well, I'm happy, I'm rewarded. And there's that constant feedback loop. And when that breaks down, you have morale problems, you have people that spin out of the unit and do crazy stuff. and there's always discipline issues within 5 to 10%, and commanders a lot of times spend the 90% of their time on 10% of the people, and I tried not to get into that cycle, because it's the 90% that really deserve your leadership.
Right.
And if you've got 10% that you're focusing on, then you're probably missing an opportunity to tend to the tribe, so to speak.
That makes sense. Okay, so before we, I'm being very mindful of the time. I know you have to catch a plane, so we've got about 15, 20 minutes. I definitely want to get to the woke stuff in the military, because I think it's civilizationally important that we not be woke in the military. But before I do that, I wanted to link, your experience as a military man to something from my regrettably tragic past, growing up in the civil war in Lebanon. I don't know how much you know of my background, Anthony, but we are Lebanese Jews who were part of the last Jewish community that was left in Lebanon when the civil war broke out, and where it became very, very a bad idea to be Jewish in Lebanon. And so we faced some very difficult situations, and then we eventually escaped and came to Canada. And not too recently, maybe a couple of years ago, I had another very well-known military man, Robert O'Neill, who has been credited with taking the shot that killed bin Laden. And I think it was when I was chatting with him where I was telling him about, and this is actually something that I discuss in the Parasitic Mind, where I was telling him about two recurring nightmares that I would have. Now I probably have them every few years, but for about 25 years after we left Lebanon, they would be a recurring nightmare. And the nightmare would take one of two types, two forms. Version one is I would be dreaming that the bad guys are coming into the house, and then my gun would jam and I wasn't able to fight back, and then I would wake up and in a panic. And the second version of that dream is that the bad guys are coming into the house, and then I had run out of ammo, so I couldn't defend myself. And it was just a recurring dream that I always had. And what amazed me is, as I was telling that story, I'm almost certain it was Robert O'Neill who told me this. He said, "Oh, well, the dream that you are describing, soldiers have it all the time, and it's called the warrior dream." Does that ring a bell with you? Are you familiar with what he's talking about, or what I'm talking about? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's it's the fear. He's right. And I know Rob very well. It's the fear of every soldier has in real life and in their dreams. It's translated in their dreams. So particularly if you've had intense close quarters combat, that those are the two things that can kill you, right? It's running out of ammo or weapon jamming. And so I think that Rob's exactly right. That it's a manifestation of a very real and serious concern. And I'm sorry for what's happened to your city, your country. It's a travesty. One of my books takes place in Bekaa Valley, Beirut.
Oh, really? Okay.
Reaper drone strike starts there and then migrates over to the United States. But it's I did a lot of research. Unfortunately, I didn't get to travel there, but I understand a lot about Lebanon and Beirut in particular, and how it was the sort of the banking center of the world, and now
not so much.
Yeah, right. So,
but what I had replied to Rob when he had shared the fact that there is a name to it called the warrior dream, I said not to engage in a competition with these great soldiers, but at least the soldiers, in that fear that they exhibit in their psyches, in their unconscious psyches, when they're dreaming, gun jamming, running out of ammo, they are soldiers. They have big guns. Whereas in my case, I am at the mercy of the bad guys who can come after me and kill me. I don't have warriors with big guns and that can call the
Right.
E6, right? So in a sense, it's the ultimate fear of being helpless in a world
Right.
where at any moment, if the knock comes at my door, I'm dead. And I discussed some of these
Right.
situations, which leads me just one quick other personal segue that I think you'd find interesting, and then I really want to get into the woke stuff. In 2017, I had faced some very nasty online death threats. I've since had one case of in-person death threat more recently, but in 2017, I had this kind of cascade, this tsunami of online death threats. This is what we're going to do to you, Jew boy. This is how we're going to kill you. This is how, and so on. So I had to file, a report with my university for them to come with me, protection, and then we had to go to the Montreal police, file a report. And at the time, the head of security of my university was a former brigadier general. As a matter of fact, his name is Jacques Lachance, who during one of our meetings, I had told him, is there any way, given the fact that I'm a, public figure that people know, yes, most of them are fans, some of them are not so fans, is there any conceivable way that you can help me, or whomever can help me, get a gun? And he looked at me quizzically and he said, that's how I found out that he had been a general. He said, I was a general in the Canadian military that was involved in protective, services, and I can't get a gun in Canada. And
Wow.
that to me brought me back to being the helpless little Jewish kid who's at the vagaries of whoever wants to decapitate me, because I don't have the supposed dignity to protect myself in Canada. I was recently told by the police, oh, if they come after you, then, call 911. And I thought, my God, what a castrated country I live in, that I have to rely on some other, I don't have the possibility to protect myself. What are your thoughts about all this? Take it away in any way you'd like to go.
Yeah. So, I think that the the segue from the dream to receiving online death threats. Uh, we live in a world here that's filled with hate. You should not. Nobody should have those kinds of death threats leveraged at them. Any kind of threats, and there's no place in this world for that level of hate, and it's unfortunate that and we're in an area now that's really dangerous for the world, for the United States, for Canada, where the corporate media, um, if you're aligned with them, they attack that kind of speech. If you're not aligned with them, they let it go for the most part, and if not, help propagate it. And so we're in a really dangerous world. I When I was the undersecretary, I unfortunately got COVID, and of course, um, the and the circumstances don't matter. I was just doing my job. We were all masked up 20 feet away. It was a virus, and just about everybody was going to get it. But because I got it, of course, I was hugely irresponsible. I was a senior guy in the Pentagon. These were all the stories. Top Pentagon official contracts COVID irresponsibly. And it's like I didn't do anything to get it, and I didn't want it, etc. The same day, Rachel Maddow, of course, her partner gets COVID, and the story is Rachel Maddow, caring for her partner with COVID, and that wasn't irresponsible, right? And it's that nuance there that's there to attack people like you, like me. My daughter, NPR put out this story that I irresponsibly contracted COVID. My daughter said, "Hey, my dad's a great man," on their Facebook page, right? Um, my dad's a great man. You should not be wishing him dead. That because a lot of people say I couldn't have a nicer guy. I hope he dies. And then she started getting death threats,
Oh,
right? Just for defending her dad. So we're in a society now that everybody lives through these online avatars, and this would be a great next book for you, Gad. But the separation between human to human contact and avatar to avatar contact really emboldens people to say stuff they would never say
Right.
to somebody's face, and they stir up and foment that hate that then gets directed at somebody and has a real psychological impact on you, on me, on my daughter, and a 12-year-old girl who's reading Instagram and she goes and hangs herself because she can't. Teen suicides have gone way up since the advent of Insta and Facebook and all of that, and there's a direct correlation there.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Okay, I'm really concerned about time. What is going on with the woke parasitic ideas? I mean, the place where you would think stands a chance of not being parasitized by all this nonsense should be the military. And yet, boy, are they doubling down on all the lunacy. What are your thoughts on that, General?
Yeah, the military for the longest time was in the top, 75 to 90% of most trusted institutions, and because it was viewed by most as being above the fray of the
Yeah.
political, discussions and activities, and by politicizing the military, as is being done now, what we're seeing is this penetration all the way into the ranks that people are being force fed this stuff that they may or may not agree with, and which I personally believe is nobody's business. The whole transgender thing and all of that. And I've long said, if there's a person that raises his or her right hand and wants to serve our country, if they're physically capable and mentally capable, then they should be able to do so. And I don't care what they look like, what they call themselves, as long as they can do the job.
Right.
I've said that for years, in active duty, out of active duty, and so the whole argument is my argument is it's nobody's business what you do behind closed doors and who you are, but it's being force fed. This ideology is not sitting well with soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. And that's reflected in the very challenging enlistment rates that we're seeing now for a second year in a row. The military is not going to meet its enlistment quotas in the United States military. And that and the COVID vaccine, COVID became kind of a cult, a religion that despite all the evidence, they kept pushing this vaccine. And there were people that didn't want to take it because they were going to start a family or whatever, and they didn't believe in it. But you became a pariah if you didn't buy into the orthodoxy. And it's really how we started the conversation about the orthodoxy.
Right.
There's a lot of independent thinkers in the military because they're just a reflection of society, and everybody, you get a million shots when you go in the military. This one was different, and so I think those two things, the woke, trans ideology, and the critical race theory and all that stuff, you're being taught not to love your country. And so when you tap into with the critical race theory is that you're a bad country, you're a bad person, you should, not like yourself. That's not good for anybody. We've talked about happy people perform better. And what you're saying is you cannot be happy because you're a bad person and you're in a bad country. And, we've got a long way to go. And there's a way to get the message across without forcing that stuff down people's throats, making it a meritocracy based on your performance. You will get promoted, and that's being seen as being taken away by some of this, as you call it, woke stuff, and it's a shame because it's really the last bastion of institutions that were not that were still respected by the American public, and I don't think that's the case anymore.
And just to add to that, and then I'll ask you a couple of last questions and we'll wrap it up. I think it was Drew Brees, I guess he's Hall of Fame quarterback now. I loved him as a player. I love New Orleans Saints because I really loved how he played and so on. And I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago where he went on a groveling kind of apology tour where he said, because he was against the, kneeling at first for the flag, but then some of his teammates corrected him about, white supremacy of the United States. And so he apologized. And I thought, here's a guy who's got this huge platform, who is a hero, who tries to weave and duck guys that are 350 pounds coming to kill him. And yet he didn't have the courage to say, I'm not going to apologize for loving my country and the flag. There's nothing wrong with being patriotic. It's not toxic masculinity. It's not white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
Guys like me who have sampled from the buffets of societies that don't have the freedoms of the US are precisely those who regrettably have to warn Americans that don't
Right.
take things for granted in the United States, because then you could end up like where I escaped from. So it's really, it breaks my heart to see Americans kind of throwing it away without even having a bullet fired because of this orgiastic guilt and self-flagellation. It's grotesque.
Yeah, no, I agree, but it gets to my point about the media. There's snipers and ambushes and full frontal attacks on people that buck the orthodoxy, and they do so in a slash and burn methodology. They want you destroyed so you can never work again. And so people are first and foremost concerned about themselves and their families. And so if he wants to be a sports announcer, if he wants to have a career in finance or whatever he wants to do in his second act, he better toe the line or
Right.
he's just going to be destroyed.
Right.
And that's where we are today. The media is a reinforcing quick reaction force for the progressive leftist ideology that is being spread all around the country and the world.
Got you. Last two questions, very quick, rapid fire. Question one: I've long wanted to ride. I know you're not Air Force or Navy, but I've long wanted to ride in a fighter jet. I'm being serious now. Can General Tata hook it up for Dr. Goodlooks?
I can certainly try, Doctor. I've got some friends that fly in the Air Force and Navy, so
I'm serious. Okay,
let's follow up on that one.
Okay, number one. Number two, if this book,
I could push you out of an airplane as a paratrooper. That I can guarantee.
I don't know if I'm that courageous. I'm not that macho. So if this book right here or any of your other books were to make it as a Hollywood movie, can you right now, on the record, this is watched by a lot of people, confirm that there will be a part for me in that movie for the supreme masculine military general played by myself, since I fit that role? Can you confirm that?
Well, I'm looking for a lead for Garrett Sinclair. So what I see is you as the leading man, macho man right here.
Is it okay that I'm not 6 feet? Is it okay if I'm under 6 feet?
That's fine. They can put some elevator shoes on you and that kind of thing.
Okay, so then I think we got to do it. Anthony, what a pleasure talking to you. I wish I could keep you longer, but I know you have a plane to catch. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope that we stay in touch. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye offline. Real pleasure meeting you, General.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much.
Cheers.